Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Command Point. My name's Ryan. Today I'm with my co-host Shane.
How's it going?
It's going good, and today we've got a guest on the show. We've got Sean, our resident Tyranid expert.
Kinda, something like that. I like to think so, but I don't know.
Yeah, today this is going to be our first Kill Team Faction deep dive of the new edition, and we're starting off here with Tyranids because every time I'm on the Discord looking and seeing what people are talking about, what people are worried about, what people think is probably the strongest team in the compendium, at least, it's always Hive Fleets for sure.
Yeah, they're strong. I think it's cool that they get two fire teams, and each one gets is super interesting and strong in its own right. So people should be scared.
Yeah, so speaking of fire teams, do you want to go ahead and get us started, Sean?
Yeah, so quick overview. There are three fire team options. There's Genestealers, Tyranid Swarm, which is the Gaunts, and Tyranid Warriors. You can have two fire teams. The only restriction there is that you're only allowed to have one Swarm. So the Genestealer fire team is 5 Genestealers. Of course, one of them can be a leader. The Swarm fire team can be some combination of 8 either Hormagaunts or Termagants. Termagants are the shooting ones, and Hormagaunts are the siding towns. If you decide to give a Devourer to one of the Termagants, it counts as 2 models. So I've seen a lot of lists floating around now that do have a couple of those Devourer Termagants there just as an option. And Tyranid Warriors, typically you're going to have, well, you can have a max of 1 gunner, up to 3 fighters, and of course there's a leader option as well. So when you really look at all the mixing and matching there, lots of really interesting potentials between 6 elite models. If you were to do 2 warrior fire teams, you could do some kind of mix and have a medium number of models with a lot of offensive output if you want to do like 1 warrior fire team and 1 Genestealer fire team. Of course, you can do 2 Genestealers, which is going to be like crazy glass cannon-y, lots of offensive output with 10 models, but only 9 wounds apiece. Or you can get the Swarm in there to cover objectives and probably back them up with warriors. Lots of different viable options there that all have very distinct personalities to them.
You know, I just want to pause and take a look at the Gaunts for a second. I mean, you brought it up briefly, but that Devourer Termagant is a really interesting looking model to me. I understand that it does take up 2 spots, but just the idea of having, because usually it's got group activation too, so you can activate 2 of them at once, or you have to activate 2 of them at once. The idea of being able to, before, like in between your opponent's activations, you can essentially get 10 Devourer shots off with Ceaseless. I mean, it's Ballistic Skill 4, but damage 3/4. It's basically a bolter. That's a lot of shooting.
Yeah.
Is this something that you think could be powerful, maybe?
It definitely has a lot of potential to be powerful, yeah, because I've seen a lot of people maybe right now flirting with just the idea of 4 Hormagaunts and 2 of the Devourer Gaunts. So you can do that activation of having 10 shots while still like not full on spam, but 6 models in 1 fire team, and you get to back them up with another fire team. Like, that's really solid. And yeah, that's a pretty decent profile for what's supposed to be kind of a chaff model. It's in the chaff team. Once it does take up 2 slots. But so the cool thing is that whenever as soon as you put Ceaseless on them, like, they're okay. It's already a 4 up to hit, and then re-rolling ones is that as good as a 3 up? Off the top of my head, I can't.
I mean, like, just looking at it, the thing is, you're also getting 5 attacks with this, as opposed to like 4 with like most bolt guns. So like, I mean, if they spike, these guys can shoot as good, if not better, than like a Space Marine with a bolt gun.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, on average, you're hitting with what, 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And it's a 3/4 damage, and then you have another model that's also going to activate. Since it's a group activation too, you can like pop them out at the same time from out of cover. You can do that fun chaining thing when you have 1 model in cover, and then that model provides the second model cover, and they just kind of like zip around the board together. to find different angles and different shots. So yeah, you can like basically whatever barrier the first one's hiding behind, you get to effectively extend that barrier by using a model. So
Yeah. Every model that I'm seeing here in the compendium has Synapse. So can you tell us what Synapse does?
yeah, so if you're within 6 inches of a Synapse operative, which is going to be your warriors, you essentially don't count as being injured. So the first bullet point says you don't lose a circle from movement. The second bullet says you don't suffer the ballistic skill and weapon skill modifier. If I'm running the Tyranid Swarm fire team, I'm probably going to be pairing them up with the Tyranid Warrior fire team anyway, so that I have my kind of objective claimer guys or my models that I want to tie guys up with. But then I also have my elite kind of buff tough guys. So they're going to provide that 6-inch Synapse bubble, and unlike what we saw in the kind of prime of the Tyranid Swarm in early first edition, now we're gonna have 3 warriors on the board alongside your swarm. Usually we only saw 1 or 2 in first edition. I guess it was possible once we moved to 125 you could do more, but it was very rare to see 3 warriors alongside Gaunts in most meta lists. But with a 6-inch bubble spawning from 3 different guys that have 18 or 19 wounds each, it's, you're probably going to be within that Synapse range. And super important there is that means all warriors give the effect themselves. So warriors are never going to suffer from injury. Not that it's that easy to get them there because they have 18 or 19 wounds.
Yeah. And one other thing about the Gaunts that I wanted to talk about, Hormagaunts are, they die very easily, obviously. 6 up save, 7 wounds, but offensively, these guys are a lot stronger than they used to be. Even like when you like weigh everything, at least from what I've seen. Scything Talons, 4 attacks, weapon skill 4, but damage 3-5, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
And relentless, so you're rerolling all your failed hits. What do we think about that?
We used to say like you don't charge with Hormagaunts expecting them to kill things, which is weird. Like when you look at them, they look scary. Now attack marines are way smaller than they should be, but like they're as big as attack marine if you look at the models. I know they're not supposed to be, but so they look scary, but like they were not good at killing things in the old edition. And a lot of that was because there was no armor piercing. They only got like 2 attacks, and it was like strength 3. You put them up against a 3-up save and they're really not going to do anything. But the way melee combat works now, we're not rolling attacks against 3-up save. Like you're just cutting through. And because you can get so many of these guys, and because they're group activation too, like you're probably just going to YOLO them every time, and you're just going to put out as much damage as you can. 3-5 and relentless. So like every die, there's a 25% chance you're going to crit, which on a model that's supposed to be kind of like a weak throwaway guy, like that's really good. And you have 4 attacks. So it's
damage 5 too. On a crit.
Yeah, so it's a 2 out of 3 chance that you're going to get at least 1 crit. It's really solid, and we'll get to equipment later, I'm sure. But toxin sacks, if you have a 2 out of 3 chance of getting 1 crit, that's pretty much going to generate an extra hit. So really, really solid.
You can take 8 of them in a fire team, as opposed to the Genestealer's 5. So I honestly think that Hormagaunts can give Genestealers a run for their money.
It's quite possible. We haven't even talked about Genestealers yet, but it seems like everything here so far is pretty good. Like there doesn't seem to be a weak link as far as the data sheets go. But on that note, let's go into the Genestealers and talk about them a little bit. First of all, we talked about them on our fire team video. I think these are the ones that I have the most experience playing against. And the Genestealers, man, they're crazy. It's first of all, they have 9 wounds, which is a really good mark for these, like, I don't even know what you would call this archetype of model, but kind of quote unquote squishy, like very killy guy that isn't pure chaff. but is kind of there to do a job, kind of like a Bloodletter or like a Zangor or something.
I think calling them a missile would be a good comparison. They rush in, they do their damage. You don't care if they live or die.
Yeah. So these 9-wound models, I think that's what kind of separates the really good missiles, we'll call them, from the just average ones. Is I think having 8 wounds or having 9 wounds. So Genestealers have 9 wounds, which is a really big bracket. Outside of that, I mean, they have the 5-up invuln, so that helps with their survivability. They've got this hidden horror ability, which basically says that while they have a conceal order, it's always treated as having a conceal order, even if your opponent is on a vantage point shooting at you. That's a really big thing. It helps them get up the board without getting shot off too early. But offensively, I think is where it just gets crazy, because these guys are like overkill. You look specifically at the double rending clause, 5 attacks, that's immediately more than most models. Usually it's 4. Weapon skill 3, damage 4/5, that's really good. Relentless, that's amazing. And it has rending. I mean, what more do you need, right? I mean, this is a can opener.
I mean, Sean, you and I played a game. I was just playing Assault Intercessors against your Genestealer and Tyranid Warrior list, and none of my Assault Intercessors even lived long enough to get stuck in with any of your Warriors, because they just got absolutely shredded by these Genestealers.
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of their potential lies. Like, you almost can't even look at the Genestealer profile on its own. You need to look at the fact that, it's a really tough model offensively, and you get 5 of them at once. And not only do you get 5 of them at once, you also get another fire team. So, when you're looking at a Genestealer going toe-to-toe with, like, pretty much any model in the Space Marine line, you got to remember, like, yeah, those two can really go toe-to-toe, and I'm going to have 3 warriors backing them up. It's like, what? So, they're going to die. But they're probably going to take out somebody first and maybe even get a swing at somebody else. Or they're going to go 1-for-1, crippling a much, much stronger model down to near death. On its own, yeah, great data sheet. But in the context of 2 fire teams, especially, it's just like, it's so much.
Let's talk about the Tyranid Warriors now. These are the ones that I know the least about.
Yeah, 18 wounds. Okay, that's kind of the headliner. 18 wounds. And they're within their own Synapse bubble, so they're not going to suffer from being injured. But then they have just so much flexibility in loadouts, because they get to take, basically, they have the 4 arms, if you're familiar with the models. So you get to choose between having melee weapons and range weapons, or 2 sets of melee weapons. So right there, there's a lot of versatility in the models and how they play a role in your team. Do you want all flex models? Do you want a couple specialists and then some weapon beasts, your melee guys? They do a lot. So typical movement, 3 circles, 2 APL that can go up to 3 using 1 CP. So 1 model can go up to 3, which I have done in 4 games in with playing Warriors, and in every game, multiple turns, I definitely use that to give them a 3rd action. Defense 3, pretty standard. Save 4, which isn't amazing, but again, 18 wounds. So there's definitely been a lot of discussion in the forums about how to kit these guys out and how to build a fire team. And that gets even more interesting if you do the double warrior kill team. So it has 6 warriors on it. So looking at the options first for melee, you can either get a pair of bone swords, so 4 attacks, hitting on 3s, damage 4/6, and lethal 5. Really good chance that you're gonna get out of 4 dice, at least 1 crit. Good chance of getting 2, and so that's right off the bat just a ton of damage. That's probably 2 hits to kill most models in the game, and then it's gonna really put a huge dent in some of the tougher guys. Scything Talons, 4 attacks hitting on 3s, also 4/6, but instead of having the lethal 5 up, it's balanced. So better chance of doing some damage, not as good a chance at doing crazy damage. So I definitely see the argument for using Scything Talons instead. Makes it a more reliable model.
Yeah, and for those who don't know what balanced is, do you mind explaining that?
Yeah, that's the one where you get to re-roll 1 die. So you're rolling 4, you're hitting on 3s, so you'll probably fail one of them, perhaps two. But yeah, so you get that reroll, and when your weapon skill is a 3 and you get a free reroll, like that just ups your odds like crazy. Rerolling hitting on a 5 is whatever. Rerolling hitting on a 3 is amazing. Definitely more consistent damage there. Rending Claws, 4 attacks. Hitting on 3s, damage 4 or 5, but it has the rending ability. So if you get a crit, you can change one of your normal hits to a crit.
I was going to ask, I feel like the rending claws, they do seem worse to me than the bone swords. I mean, worse crit overall, 4-5 instead of 4-6, and rending instead of lethal 5.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
I'm not going to use rending claws.
Mhm.
I'd rather just be doing lethal 5.
Yeah.
And getting crits more often that way. And on top of that, the crit always has an extra damage. So I think that's one of those things that rending claws are like, I think in this, they really did a good job at trying to make all weapon options seem equal or close to equal. But I think in a lot of cases, they gave weapon options because the bits exist.
Right.
Yeah.
Rending claws are kind of an iconic part of the aesthetic for Tyranids. And a lot of people are already going to have their models modeled that way, so they can't just not make rending claws a thing.
I do want to say I'm so glad that they gave rending claws the rending ability.
Yeah,
I mean, that would have
yeah.
been the biggest waste of all, right?
Absolutely.
I know, right? Yeah, and it does make sense. Yeah, so it's piercing armor.
So
Yeah.
you were talking about bits and stuff, and I've been meaning to ask you. These Tyranid warriors, they have like 4 arms, a ton of different weapon options. When it comes to like actually like modeling these models, would you recommend magnetizing their arms, or do you think they're a little too spindly to be able to like really be magnetized and be secure?
Yeah, so you got to use big magnets, and the magnets I got, I wish I remember the size off the top of my head. They feel good and they feel secure while we're in game. And for transport, if you're using foam, you really need magnets because Tyranids have a lot of spiky bits, and putting them in foam is a pain. I finally made a magnetic tray transport, so I don't need to worry about that anymore. But in terms of versatility, it's definitely not a bad idea. Now, keeping track of a million different magnetized arms can be a pain sometimes. So what I ended up doing is I had 1 box of warriors that I magnetized and another box that I made with like some really default common loadouts, so that my ones I always need, and then I can magnetize the other couple if I need to switch in and out.
Smart.
Yeah, but it's the $55 or $51 or something like that for a box of 3 warriors. So it's a big pain, and magnetizing is a good idea. Even more annoying is that bone swords are super popular, and there are only 6 in the kit, and in one of my favorite loadouts, you need 9. So it's kind of a pain. We're spending a lot of time on this data sheet, but there's a lot of stuff you can do with it.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now going to the heavy and flex side, the regular fighter can have a Death Spitter, which is kind of the higher damage gun. The Devourer, which has Ceaseless, so it's lower damage but more consistent dice. So depending on which way you want to go there, that's good. Spine Fists, which are like pistols. So they get 5 attacks, and their ballistic skill is better on a 3-up, but only has a 6-inch range. I feel like that's one that I'm going to forget about for a long time, and then in a year I'm going to be like, oh, I should try that, and then it could be really good or could be really bad. I think it's one that's one where you'll run into situations in game where you really wish you had it, but maybe don't want to like commit yourself to having only that ranged weapon the entire time.
Right.
But I am happy to be proven wrong on that, because that could be sweet. And then the Lash Whip, which does have a ranged profile, but it has an even more important function. So the range attack is 4 dice hitting on 3s, which is really good for a warrior. Damage 3/4, only has a range of 3, but it does have the stun ability. So it's going to knock down, if you get a crit with it, you're going to knock the opponent's APL down 1.
I have a question about stun. This is a little off topic, but what does that only reduce it for the turning point, right?
It's basically you have to suffer 1 activation of being stunned. So
Okay.
if you haven't activated yet, it will apply for that turn. If you have already activated, then it's going to last through to the next turn.
And I mean the Lash Whip, it also has another function in
It
melee, correct?
sure does. It sure does. Yeah. So while an enemy operative is within engagement range of friendly operatives equipped with this weapon, subtract 1 from that enemy operative's attacks characteristics. In melee, -1 attack, so that's going to keep you alive longer, because you only have 18 wounds to spare. But then on top of that, -1 attack die also means -1 defense die when you're in melee. So you're really going to shred guys up even more on top of your 4 dice, 4/6 profile. Or I guess if you do the Lash with Bone Sword combination, it's a 3 attack dice with the Bone Sword, which we already read that profile. It's really strong, and you're reducing the opponent's attacks by 1. But I think what we're seeing often too is the Weapon Beast, which is the warriors have an ability. If you are equipped with 2 melee weapons, add 1 to their attacks characteristics. So, rules as written, the way the community is interpreting this now, if you are equipped with a pair of Bone Swords and the Bone Sword Lash Whip combination, that counts as having 2 melee weapons. Because single Bone Sword is 1 line of 1 profile, and a pair of Bone Swords is a separate profile, which means you are rolling 5 dice because you're attacking with your pair of Bone Swords, which is base 4. You're adding 1 for having an extra Bone Sword, and your opponent is rolling 1 fewer attack die because of Lash Whip. That Weapon Beast it melts stuff.
Oh my god, yeah, this is ridiculous.
yeah, it just absolutely melts things. There was a discussion going on in the Hive Fleet forum earlier in the last couple days about overkill and the potential of upgrading these models too much to the point where you're giving them more offensive potential than is it practical, and you're going to be missing out on a lot of opportunities because you're doing more than you need to. When you could be like having flex models that can actually do something at range. My general play style is probably way too aggressive, and I think I'm not an aggressive personality outside of the game, but inside most games I play, I usually, when I lose, it's because I was too aggressive. And like kind of looking back at old games and old tournament standings, I can usually point to having a great first one, turn 1 and 2, and then falling apart from there. Here, I don't know. I think that sometimes you just want to prioritize your targets, completely shred them, and then just clean up the rest later. And that's how I'm choosing to approach the game for now in the early stages, while I'm kind of discovering some of the nuance of different matchups. And once the meta starts to evolve and settle, and once we've had a time to see how some of those things click, then maybe I'll want to go more flex. But for now, you will always see at least 1 model that's a Weapon Beast on the board, and if I'm running 6 warriors, there's probably going to be 3.
I wanted to talk about the overkill thing a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I think this is something that we're going to hear a lot as the game kind of goes on and as we see more diverse list building. When people say overkill, I think they're operating too much in the mindset of the ceiling, the max potential that this can do. And they look at it and they think, you don't need that much. That's more than you possibly need. Whereas I think people should start looking at these things in terms of a range of outcomes, and something that is overkill, quote unquote, is really just something that has a very, very good floor as to what you can expect at the very bare minimum. Because a lot of these weapons, I mean, I've been playing a lot with demons, and like my bloodletters have 4 attacks, hitting on 3s, lethal 5, 4/6 damage. And that's really strong. You look at that and you think that's a really strong model. But the range of outcomes, it can whiff. Bad things can happen. Whereas with something like, I mean, kind of like you're talking about with the Weapon Beast and with the Genestealer, even like with Toxin Sex that we're going to talk about later, the people are looking too much at the maximum capability and thinking you don't need that much. Whereas I think they should be looking at the bare minimum that it's going to do and saying, that's very reliable. I like that.
I'm not too worried right now about wasting potential because I'm killing too much.
Mhm.
I will be happy to lose a game because I killed too much and didn't do enough other things.
Well said.
Yeah. So the other option. So here's the alternative. If you don't want to go Weapon Beast or you don't want to use the Toxin Sack offensive, you could go Flex. So you have the other options would be Death Spitters, which are good guns. Okay, 5 attacks, damage 4 or 5, ballistic skill 4 with no rerolls. So that's really iffy. And like I know you can't go on anecdotally, but I played our local Cole on Tuesday, and I had a model take 10 shots. It rolled and got 5 misses. So I spend a CP to shoot. We have a tactic. You can spend a CP. If you did no wounds, you can shoot again. Shot again, 5 misses. And yeah, that's an outlier. I rolled 10 dice. I was supposed to get 5 hits, but like that happens sometimes. And even if I got out of 10 dice, even if I got my average of 5, like they're gonna roll their armor save, so they're gonna cancel most of that, and it's not as reliable. I do love the Death Spitter on the leader, because the leader has a ballistic skill of 4, so that I love. My leader will always have Bone Swords and Death Spitter, because that's a great reliable flex model with good shooting and good melee, because I'm hitting on twos in combat. I like, Devour would be better, and that seems to be the consensus among a lot of Tyranid players right now. Devour, 5 attacks, BS4, only damage 3/4, but it has Ceaseless. So you're gonna get reroll 1s. So that does make that more reliable. So you're at least gonna spray out some damage on presumably on your way into combat, soften them up enough to take them down or injure them and make your job easier later.
These heavy gunners are pretty interesting. I know we were just talking about how the ballistic skill 4 is a little bit unreliable, especially on something like a Death Spitter. But I do think if you're gonna have that ballistic skill 4, you should be reserving it for things that are hitting like a truck. And they do have a couple of things that can do that with the heavy gunners, correct?
Yeah. So 2 heavy options, Venom Cannon and Barb Strangler. Venom Cannon, 5 attacks, hitting on 4s, damage 5/6. Heavy, AP 1. Not as reliable. Barb Strangler, 5 attacks, hitting on 4s, damage 4/5, so a little weaker. Heavy, does not have AP 1, but it does have Blast. I have 1 of each in my roster, depending if I'm going up against a more elite team or a more team with more numbers. Because if you get like a turn 1 blast off, that can often hit a couple other models. And for a blast weapon, that's a lot of damage. 5 dice, damage 4/5. I think that's where that tilted you from the very beginning in our game, Ryan. Turn 1, activation 1, you had your assault intercessors side by side, and I dashed into a firing lane where I could shoot at both of them, and I think I injured them both. On the first activation of the game.
Yeah, pro tip, don't deploy on the line. Also, I wouldn't say I was tilted. I mean, I knew what I was getting into when I was running assault intercessors.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the Barb Strangler goes, though, with that blast, the second that you're able to get it, the second you're able to utilize that blast ability, I mean, that's 10 dice that you now get to roll. Granted, it's at separate targets, but the value there is really, even with ballistic skill 4, I think you're really opening yourself up to the chance of doing a lot with that model.
Yeah, for sure. And I am very grateful for the tactic that's left. If you don't do wounds, shoot again.
Yeah.
Because, 4 weapon skill 4 on that Prima model is, feels bad sometimes.
Yeah. Definitely. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the double warrior fire team kill team. So you can take 2 warrior fire teams, and that can just be your team, and that's going to be 6 models. So comparing that to something like any of the marine fire teams or the trader marine fire team, as an elite team for 6 models, that is a boatload of wounds. I mean, that is so much more durable than a lot of Marine teams. Granted, there is the 4-up save instead of the 3-up, but when you factor in Synapse, so they're never getting injured, the fact that they have 7 more wounds than most Marines, it gets pretty crazy, and they're a pretty flexible team. In my opinion, the biggest downside, though, to something like Ballistic Skill 4, like we were just talking about, isn't so much shooting at a 4-up. It's the fact that if you're playing this double Tyranid warrior team, you're playing an elite team. And an elite team really needs to be able to benefit from Overwatch. And having Overwatch on 5s, I think really, really limits the capabilities of a double Tyranid warrior fire team, kill team. And that's the biggest thing that stuck out to me. So I think if you're going the route of double warrior fire team, then I think you should go mostly weapon beast. I do think obviously you should have at least one gunner, but leaning too heavily on the shooting as an elite team with Ballistic Skill 4 base, I think can really hurt you.
And as an elite team, 6 models, it's kind of tricky them only being APL2 for holding objectives.
Mhm.
It's just, you hold objectives just as well as many of the chaff models.
Yeah.
So that's definitely tricky, and you're losing against other elite teams. I think you just need to go aggressive, rely on your 18 wounds, because that wound column doesn't rely on dice as much.
Mhm.
When you have fewer wounds and a better save, you're still relying on your dice. The other thing too, because they're so good in melee, your armor save is the number of dice you roll. And when you have that many dice, one of my favorite things so far has been charging in, rolling 5 dice, getting to see, and my opponent expecting me to just okay, first die is gonna crit, when a lot of times my first die is, okay, parry your crit. And wait, what? It's yeah, you only rolled 2 successes, so I'm gonna parry your crit, so you can't hit me with your max damage. You're gonna hit me for what, 3 or 4? And now you're out of dice, and the rest of my dice are just gonna kill you. So having that many attack dice and the high probabilities with these loadouts of actually scoring several hits and several crits it's a defensive buff.
Mm-hmm.
So you keep them in cover, you sneak your way up the board, you use a couple fun tactics and things and small abilities to keep yourself concealed, and flip-flopping between concealed and engaged, and you get your way up the board and you charge in so that your saves are applying where you're at your best.